welcome to the Coach's Call with me, your host, Guido Perino. As you can see, I've got my colors on today. We're going to talk a little bit about Italy, from world champions to World Cup outsiders, trying to understand maybe what broke beyond the memes, beyond the jokes that are happening right now, beyond the comedians, all expressing their outrage through comedy. Look, there are collapses, and then there's slow, quiet declines that nobody wants to admit might be happening. I think those are the dangerous ones. The ones where the brand and the history and the mythology, right? They keep telling you everything is fine, even when the results are screaming that they're not. And today we're talking about one of the biggest footballing nations in the world, four-time World Cup champion, a country that defines tactical intelligence and defensive discipline and football culture. And yet, they've now not played in a World Cup since 2014. They missed 2018, they missed 2022, and now they missed 2026. You start to think this is no longer a blip, this isn't bad luck. There's system failure going on here. And the real question becomes, how did Italy miss 3 World Cups? It's not just that. There's more to it, right? It's how did one of the greatest football nations in history stop producing a team that's capable of qualifying? So I'm going to start with the obvious, right? If you look at the surface, Italy's story just doesn't make sense. They won Euro 2020. They were not long ago the best team in Europe. So how does a team go from that to losing at home to North Macedonia, to failing again, now being completely absent from 3 straight World Cups? And the answer starts to get uncomfortable. Nothing sudden has happened. They didn't collapse. Italy's been decaying. Look, if you go back to their qualification campaigns, they don't look like a bad team. At times they dominate possession, they've controlled games, they've outshot opponents, often massively. In that infamous loss to North Macedonia, they had over, I think, 30 shots. 30! And they lost. And maybe that tells us everything. It isn't a team that can't play. It's a team that just can't seem to finish. It's a team that controls games but can't figure out how to decide them. And when you live in that space, you draw games that you should win, you drop points that you can't afford to drop, and then suddenly you're not qualifying automatically. You're going into playoffs, and playoffs don't care about your history. They don't care about your possession stats. They don't care that you used to be Italy. They care about one moment, one shot, one mistake. Unfortunately, Italy keeps losing those moments. And then it gets a little bit deeper, right, if you think about it, because once something happens twice, it probably stops being coincidence. It starts becoming identity. So Italy now carries pressure that previous generations didn't. Every qualifier matters more. Every missed chance feels heavier. Every playoff becomes a psychological trap. Look, players aren't just trying to win. They're trying to not be the next failure. That could be a dangerous place to operate from, right? In hockey, we say you grip the stick a little tighter. Because when you're playing to not fail, that's when things creep in. You hesitate, you tighten up, you lose instinct. In football, at the highest level, that hesitation becomes the difference between scoring and missing. You saw it even in the last game, right? When some of those close chances, they just whiffed on them. It becomes the difference between qualifying and watching from home. And Italy's not just losing game, they're losing belief at the exact moments that it matters most. But if I'm going to be clear, right, psychology didn't start this. Psychology has become a symptom at this point. I think the root problem is much deeper. It lives within the system because when you look at Italy today, I'm going to say there's one glaring issue. There might be a few, but here's one glaring issue. Where are the attackers? Where are the game breakers? Where are the players who can take over a match? For decades, Italy could rely on defensive excellence, structure, discipline, right? But modern football has changed. You still need structure. The games all need structure. You hear me talk about it on other things. We always need structure, right? But you also need creativity. You need speed. Final, third quality, right? Look, Italy doesn't produce any of that. They don't produce enough of that anymore. So let's talk about Serie A, right? Because this is where the pipeline is supposed to exist. And the reality is, Italian clubs don't prioritize Italian players the way they used to. Foreign talent fills key attacking roles. Young Italian players don't get the same minutes. And when they do, they're often developed in systems that prioritize safety over expression. So what do you end up with? Maybe you end up with some technically solid players, some tactically aware players, but not enough difference makers. Not enough players who can create something out of nothing and at that international level. That's what separates, I think, the good teams from the elite ones. So let's address the elephant in the room. And you heard me talk about Euro 2020, right? That's a tournament. That's the tournament. They won. Maybe that tournament did more harm than good. Maybe not in that moment. Everybody enjoyed it. It was real. It was deserved. But maybe it created an illusion that everything was fine, that the system worked, that Italy had figured it out. But that team, that Euro team, was built on a specific group, veteran leadership, peak form. It was really the perfect storm of chemistry and confidence. It wasn't a foundation, it was a moment. And when that moment passed, here's the thing, and we've seen it now, there just wasn't enough behind it. Of course, fingers always point to the coaching, the carousel of them, the different managers, the different ideas, the different tactical approaches. What's happened is that we've got no long-term identity now. There's no consistent development philosophy, and when that happens, players don't just have to perform, they have to constantly adapt, relearn, reset. That instability shows up in some of the biggest matches. That's what we've seen. Because when the pressure hits, teams fall back on identity. And I don't think right now Italy has a clear identity, right? You start to see it when you look at the bigger picture. It isn't about a coach, it isn't about a player, it isn't about one missed chance. It's about a football nation that basically it didn't evolve fast enough. Others around it did. France, they've built a pipeline of elite athletes and creators. England, they've invested in youth development, modern coaching. Spain, they've rebuilt its identity. They've got technical depth. Italy, it held on to what it was instead of building what it needed to become. So where does this leave the team? Where does it leave everything, right? I think here's the truth. I mean, they're not finished, but they're definitely at a crossroad. They can either double down on tradition, hope the past comes back, maybe blame bad luck, and maybe they're doing that because I heard they're keeping the same coaches and the same system. Maybe they still haven't learned. We'll see. But the choice is they can rebuild the system. They can invest in youth. They can prioritize development over short-term results. They can create a space for attacking talent to emerge. Maybe more importantly, redefine what Italian football is. Because the version of Italy that won in 2006, they're not going to win today. And the version that won in Euro 2020 doesn't sustain success. It was just a model in that period of time. Look, I don't think this is just a football story. I think it's a lesson in sports and systems and leadership. We see it in other teams. We see it in the NHL, right? Decline doesn't happen overnight. It happens when small problems go unaddressed and when success hides structural flaws, when identity becomes a limitation instead of a strength. Italy didn't fall, they drifted. Now they have to decide whether they're going to keep drifting or finally change direction. That's the Coach's Call. I'm your host, Guido Prino. Thanks for joining me. Hope you're a subscriber. If you're not, please do. Love to have you long term. Looking forward to the World Cup. Take care.